Hi everyone, welcome to The Witch's Book, Dark Tales. If you enjoy this video, like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we see you on the other side.
Story 1. The night shift encounter. I work as a nurse at a mid-sized hospital in Pennsylvania. It's one of those older buildings that was built in the 60s, with long, poorly lit corridors, and that distinctive hospital smell that never quite goes away. I've been doing night shifts for about 3 years now. So I'm pretty used to the eerie quietness that settles in after 2 a.m. Most people think hospitals are chaotic 24/7s, but the truth is, the graveyard shift is usually dead silent, which makes sense given the name. This happened about 6 months ago, and I still think about it almost every shift. It was around 3:30 in the morning, and I was doing my rounds on the 4th floor. The 4th floor is mostly geriatric patients and long-term care, so it's usually the quietest wing in the building. I was checking vitals on a patient in room 428 when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Not the soft squeak of nurse shoes or the deliberate pace of a doctor, but this odd shuffling sound like someone dragging their feet. I poked my head out into the corridor and saw a figure at the far end of the hall, near the emergency exit. It was a patient in a hospital gown, which wasn't unusual by itself. Patients wander sometimes, especially the elderly ones with dementia or confusion. But something about this person's posture was off. They were standing completely still, facing the wall with their head tilted at this unnatural angle. I called out, "Sir? Are you okay? Do you need help getting back to your room?" No response. The figure just stood there motionless. I started walking toward them, my shoes echoing in the empty hallway. As I got closer, I could see they were trembling slightly, like they were cold, except the hospital is always kept warm. When I was maybe 20 feet away, I called out again, louder this time. That's when they whipped their head around to face me. I actually stopped walking because the movement was so abrupt, so mechanical. And when I finally got a good look at their face, I felt my stomach drop. Their eyes were completely dilated, just massive black pupils with barely any iris showing. Their mouth was hanging open slightly, and they were breathing in this weird, raspy way. Before I could say anything, they started walking toward me. Not normal walking, though. It was this jerky, uncoordinated movement, like a marionette being controlled by someone who didn't quite know what they were doing. I instinctively backed up and reached for my radio to call security. But as soon as my hand touched the radio, the person stopped moving and just stared at me with that same blank, dead expression. I managed to get on the radio and request backup, keeping my eyes on this person the entire time. They didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there staring. Within 2 minutes, security arrived, and as soon as they rounded the corner, the person collapsed. Just dropped to the floor like someone had cut their strings. We rushed over, and that's when things got even weirder. This wasn't a registered patient. Their hospital gown didn't have any of our tags or markings. Security checked every room on the floor, and no one was missing. We checked the security footage, and it showed this person entering through the emergency exit stairwell, but the cameras in the stairwell were mysteriously not working that night. The person was unresponsive, so we got them to the EE when they finally came to about an hour later. They had no memory of how they got into the hospital or why they were there. They claimed the last thing they remembered was going to bed in their apartment across town. The toxicology report came back negative for everything. No drugs, no alcohol, nothing that would explain their behavior. Hospital administration tried to downplay the whole thing, chalking it up to a confused patient from another floor, but I know what I saw. That wasn't confusion or disorientation. That was something else entirely. I still do night shifts, but I make sure I'm never alone in those hallways anymore.
Story 2. Room 237. I used to work as a hospital janitor during college. It wasn't glamorous, but the pay was solid, and it left my days free for classes. The hospital I worked at was this sprawling complex that had been expanded multiple times over the decades, resulting in this maze-like layout where newer sections connected to older wings through these narrow, outdated corridors. There was one room that everyone on the cleaning staff avoided if they could help it. Room 237, on the 2nd floor of the oldest wing. The other janitors would joke about it, saying it was cursed or haunted, but there was always this underlying tension when someone mentioned it. I didn't believe in any of that supernatural stuff, so when I got assigned to clean that wing one night, I didn't think twice about it. It was around midnight when I got to room 237. The door was slightly ajar, which was unusual because empty rooms were supposed to be kept locked. I pushed it open and flicked on the light. The room was completely standard. Hospital bed, a small bathroom, one window with the blinds drawn. Nothing unusual at all. I started with the bathroom, then moved on to mopping the floor. That's when I noticed the temperature. It got cold, like noticeably cold. I could see my breath fogging in the air, which made no sense because the hospital's climate control kept everything at a consistent 72 degrees. I checked the thermostat on the wall and it read 74 degrees. But I was literally watching my breath create little clouds in front of my face. I decided to work quickly and get out of there. As I was mopping near the window, I heard something that made me freeze. It was a child's laughter, faint but distinct, coming from the bathroom I had just cleaned. I turned around, and the bathroom door, which I had left wide open, was now closed. My logical brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was old pipes, maybe the door was on some kind of automatic closer mechanism. But my instincts were screaming at me to leave. I dropped the mop and headed for the exit. That's when I heard it again, the laughter, but this time it was right behind me. I spun around and saw the bathroom door was open again. I didn't see anyone, didn't see anything unusual, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I grabbed my cart and left that room without finishing the job. When I got back to the janitor's station, one of the older guys took one look at my face and said, "You cleaned 237, didn't you?" He told me that room had a history. Back in the 80s, a young boy had died there under mysterious circumstances. The official report said it was complications from his illness, but the nurses who were there that night reported strange things. Equipment malfunctioning, alarms going off for no reason, and that same child's laughter echoing through the halls even after he was pronounced dead. The hospital tried to downplay it, and eventually the story faded into the background. But every janitor who's worked there long enough has a story about room 237. I requested to never be assigned to that wing again, and thankfully my supervisor agreed without asking questions. I graduated and moved on to a better job, but I still think about that night sometimes. The rational part of me wants to dismiss it as an overactive imagination or some weird coincidence, but I know what I felt in that room, and I know what I heard. Story 3. The Patient Who Wasn't There. I'm an ER doctor, and I've been practicing for about 8 years now. You see a lot in the emergency room. Trauma, overdoses, psychiatric episodes, you name it. I've learned to stay calm under pressure and not let things get to me. But what happened last year still bothers me, and I don't talk about it with my colleagues because I know how it would sound. It was a typical Friday night in the ER, which means it was absolute chaos. We had every bed filled, people waiting in the hallways, the whole 9 yards. Round 11 p.m., a nurse came up to me and said there was a patient in Bay 7 who needed immediate attention. She said the patient was exhibiting signs of severe trauma, but was refusing to communicate. I grabbed the chart she handed me and headed to Bay 7. But here's the thing. There was no chart. The clipboard she gave me was completely blank. No name, no insurance information, no vitals, nothing. I figured she had just grabbed the wrong clipboard in the chaos, so I pushed through the curtain to assess the patient myself. The bay was empty. No patient, no equipment set up, nothing. The bed was made and clearly hadn't been used. I stepped back out and found the same nurse. I asked her what was going on, told her the bay was empty. She looked at me like I was crazy and insisted she had just admitted the patient herself not 5 minutes ago. We went back to Bay 7 together, and she stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the empty bed. The color drained from her face. She said she had taken full vitals, had started an IV, had even called for a psych consult because the patient was nonverbal and appeared catatonic. But there was no evidence any of that had happened. We checked the security footage. The cameras showed her entering Bay 7 with a wheelchair, but the wheelchair appeared empty. The footage showed her going through all the motions of transferring a patient, starting an IV on thin air, even having a conversation with no one. And then it showed her leaving to get me. She was adamant that there had been a patient. She described them in detail, a middle-aged man, probably in his 40s, wearing torn, bloodied clothing. She said he had lacerations on his arms and face, and his eyes were vacant, like he was looking through her rather than at her. The hospital administration ordered a psychiatric evaluation for her, suggesting she had experienced some kind of episode brought on by stress and exhaustion. She was put on leave. But here's what they didn't see in the security footage, what I saw when we went back to review it together. In one frame, just for a split second, there's a shadow in the wheelchair. It's barely visible, more like a distortion in the image than anything solid, but it's there. And in the frame where she's supposedly starting an IV on nothing, if you look closely at the bed, there's an indentation in the mattress, like something with weight is pressing down on it. The nurse never came back to work after her leave ended. She transferred to a different hospital in a different state. I tried to reach out to her once to talk about what happened, but she never responded. I still work in that ER, and every time I walk past Bay 7, I check to make sure it's actually empty before I go in.
Story 4. The surgery that never ended. I'm a surgical nurse, and I've assisted in hundreds of procedures over my 10-year career. You develop a rhythm in the operating room, a sense of timing and flow that becomes second nature. But there was one surgery that broke every rule, defied every expectation, and left me questioning what I thought I knew about medicine. It was supposed to be a routine appendectomy on a 32-year-old male patient. The surgery was scheduled for 7 p.m., which was already unusual because we typically don't schedule elective procedures that late. But this one had been bumped from earlier in the day due to an emergency case. The patient's name was Marcus, and his pre-op workup was completely normal. No complications expected. The surgeon, Dr. Richardson, was one of the best in the hospital. He'd done thousands of these procedures and could probably do them in his sleep. The anesthesiologist put Marcus under without any issues, and we began the procedure right on schedule at 7:15 p.m. Everything was normal for the first 20 minutes. Dr. Richardson made the incision, and we began the process of locating and removing the appendix. But then things started getting strange. Dr. Richardson couldn't find the appendix where it was supposed to be. He expanded the incision, searched the abdominal cavity, but it was like the organ had just vanished. Even weirder, Marcus's anatomy seemed off. Things weren't where they were supposed to be. The intestines were in the wrong configuration. Blood vessels were running in unusual patterns. Dr. Richardson had me call in another surgeon for a second opinion. Dr. Patel came in, scrubbed it up, and confirmed that nothing about Marcus's internal anatomy matched what should be there. They decided to close him up and order more imaging to figure out what was going on. But when they tried to close the incision, the tissue wouldn't hold sutures. The skin would seal for a moment, and then the sutures would just slide out like they were trying to stitch water. I've never seen anything like it in my entire career. Dr. Richardson decided to use surgical staples instead, thinking maybe the tissue was just unusually elastic. The staples held initially, but as we were cleaning up, we heard them start popping off one by one. The incision was opening itself back up. We had no choice but to keep Marcus under anesthesia and try again. This time, Dr. Richardson used a combination of techniques, layering sutures with surgical glue and mesh. It seemed to work, and we finally closed him up successfully around 10:30 p.m. A procedure that should have taken 45 minutes had taken over 3 hours. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. As we were wheeling Marcus to recovery, he woke up. Just suddenly opened his eyes, despite still being under what should have been heavy anesthesia. He looked directly at me and said, "It's still in there. You didn't get it out." He went back under immediately, and we rushed him to recovery. We ran every scan imaginable. CT, MRI, ultrasound, everything. And Marcus was right. The appendix was still there exactly where it should have been, looking completely normal and healthy. It was like we had never even operated on him. Dr. Richardson refused to believe it. He insisted we had removed the appendix, that he had seen it with his own eyes. But there it was on the scans, clear as day. The hospital administration launched an investigation, thinking maybe we had operated on the wrong patient or that there had been some catastrophic error in patient identification. But Marcus was definitely Marcus. All the records matched. All the pre-op protocols had been followed correctly. There was no explanation for what had happened in that operating room. Marcus made a full recovery, and eventually, he did have his appendix removed in a completely routine procedure performed by a different surgeon 6 months later. That surgery went off without a hitch. Dr. Richardson took a leave of absence after the incident and eventually retired early. He never performed another surgery. I still work in that OR, but I always feel uneasy now when we have late-night procedures. Sometimes I wonder if we actually operated on Marcus that night, or if something else happened in that room, something that doesn't fit within the boundaries of medical science.
Story 5. The Visitor. I'm a hospital security guard, and I work the overnight shift at a large teaching hospital in Ohio. Most of my job involves making rounds, checking that doors are locked, and occasionally dealing with confused patients who wander out of their rooms. It's usually quiet, sometimes boring, but it's steady work with decent benefits. About 3 months ago, I was doing my 3 a.m. rounds on the 6th floor when I noticed something odd. There was a man in a suit standing at the end of the hallway, just standing there, facing the wall. It wasn't completely unusual for family members to be in the hospital late at night, but something about his posture struck me as off. I approached him and asked if he needed help finding someone or if he was lost. He didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge that I had spoken. I got closer and repeated my question, a little louder this time. Still nothing. That's when I noticed he wasn't breathing. His chest wasn't moving, there was no rise and fall, nothing. I reached out to tap his shoulder, and the moment my hand was about to make contact, he turned around. But he didn't turn like a normal person. It was like his whole body rotated as one rigid piece, like a mannequin on a rotating platform. And when I saw his face, I felt my blood run cold. He had no eyes, just smooth skin where his eyes should have been. But I could feel him looking at me, staring at me with those non-existent eyes. His mouth opened slowly, and he said in this flat, emotionless voice, "I'm waiting for someone." I backed away and immediately radioed for backup. But when I looked up again, he was gone, just vanished. I searched the entire floor, checked every room, every closet, every possible place someone could hide. Nothing. The other guards showed up and we reviewed the security footage together. The cameras showed me walking up to the empty hallway and apparently having a conversation with nothing. There was no man in a suit. There was no one there at all. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. Here's the part that made me want to quit. One of the other guards, an older guy named Frank who's worked there for 15 years, told me he's seen the same figure. Different floors, different times, but always the same description. Man in a suit, facing the wall, no eyes. Frank said the first time he saw it was on the night a patient in the ICU died unexpectedly. And every time since then, whenever that figure appears, someone in the hospital dies within the next 24 hours. I checked the records. That night, a patient in the ICU passed away at 4:17 a.m., just over an hour after my encounter. I've seen him 3 more times since then, and each time someone has died within a day. I've stopped trying to convince people it's real. Now I just file my reports, make my rounds, and try not to think about what I've seen. But I know he's real, and I know he's waiting.